Today's video is on property acronyms. If you are watching videos and you are watching anything about property or reading it, there are abbreviations and acronyms used all the time. A lot of the time you're like, what the fuck does that mean? Loan to value, LTV. LTV is used loads. Loan to value is the amount of lending that is available or is used in a property. So traditionally on a buy-to-let property, it is 75% loan to value. So if it's a £100,000 house, the bank will lend £75,000. So they'll lend a percentage of the value of the property. So that is loan to value. ROI is return on investment, also tied up with return on capital employed. So use this sort of slightly similar. So if you have £20,000 tied up in a property, so 25,000 for the example of a £100,000 house, and you are getting £1,000 on rent, what we try and look at is what that rent as an return on investment, or that ROCE, is on a percentage of what is tied up in the properties. A couple of those acronyms are used in different terms in different ways, but return on investment is really crucial across the board and is fitted into sort of different ways as well. So ROI can be sort of used in lots of different ways in an investment standpoint, but in here I'm always trying to look at what my return is on any capital that's tied up in a property. RPI, retail price index. This is a measure of inflation. There's CPI and there's also RPI. CPI, the consumer price index, but RPI is retail price index. This will give us an idea. It also tells us roughly what our money is getting eroded at if we're not using it, but also our investment is against inflation. So ideally, if RPI is at 3 or 4%, we want our property prices to be going up by 4, 5 or 6% to counteract and go against that inflation. So our money is always working for us. GDV, this is one that is used very regularly. Gross development value can be used in lots of terminology, but it basically means what the property or the land or the deal will be worth at the back end when it's done up. That might be that we see a house on the street and it's £150,000 done up, or there's an example, that gross development value will be what that is worth at the end. Or if you're looking at a land development deal where there's 4 houses and they're all worth 250 grand when they're done and finished, that GDV will be £1 million. So that is what we use quite regularly. APR, annual percentage rate. So that is what used all the time on lending. So you see your APR on your credit cards, but also your APR on what you are lending at or borrowing at on a mortgage product or on a loan when borrowing from the bank on the thing. So your APR might be 4% on your buy-to-let. That is an important number to know, but obviously we call it interest. But HMO, house of multiple occupancy. This is a multiple occupancy dwelling. This is usually, or traditionally was, a student house where you share the kitchen and then there's 5 different bedrooms and everybody sort of pays individual rent and they share one communal space. It is now getting more and more popular for professional lets, white collar or blue collar, where you all share a kitchen. You're all on individual ASTs, assured tenancy contracts. EPC, you'll have heard this lots in the news, legislation that's going to change around the EPCs potentially, but that is energy performance certificate. This tells you how energy efficient your house is. So we're looking at doors, windows, insulation in the lofts, what sort of energy source and type you're using at your property. But the grading system, and going forward, the government want all EPCs to be C and above. Currently that will be nearly impossible to do. There is not even enough labour, as in workforce, to even get close to doing all the work that is needed on some of these old Victorian houses that have nowhere near a C. However, that is a different conversation for a different day. RICS is the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. This is, you'll hear this commonly as a RICS survey or a RICS report. So they are normally surveyors that are part of this body that will come and value your house. Normally for the bank, you can get RICS done independently for yourself, but they are very different to getting a valuer. So I see this mixed as like, oh, the values are this because this estate agent said that. Estate agents have their own agendas. They're normally sort of lower paid individuals from a bigger corporation that will say, oh, it's worth 300 grand, but that is very much for them to decide on a sales basis on what they want to sell. I'm not saying disregard what estate agents say, but it's very different to a RICS report and a RICS survey where they give their values based on a slightly different standpoint and angle. SDLT, stamp duty land tax, also known as stamp duty. Heard of stamp duty before? You'll heard the term. This is the tax you pay when you buy a property. There are different tiers of SDLT, and then there's also a 3% surcharge for a second home. So the tiers of SDLT are from 0% to 1 to 2 to 3% in certain brackets, and then obviously on top of that is if you are buy-to-let and a second home investor, there is a 3% surcharge on there. So say if you were to buy a house of £400,000, your stamp duty might actually be 5% on a second home basis. So there's different tiers and different costs to stamp duty. BTL, buy to let. So use this all the time. Vanilla buy to let, boring buy to let. They are the term. We actually don't use BTL that often. We normally just say buy to let, but that is a simple vanilla let, a one-stop, like one home, single let. Single let something we use a lot. So yeah, in all the terminology, buy to let something I use a lot, but is normally a 2, 3, 4 bed house, or even a 1 bed, but the ones that we look at, single let to one person, one family living on the same roof. LHA is the local housing allowance. So this is a set rate that government set and the local council set. It comes from government and the local council set their own rates in what they give for social housing type products. It's a guideline, it's not set in stone. People can pay what they want, housing providers can pay lower, above, but it is a guidance around what the local rate should be. It occasionally goes up, it doesn't always go up with inflation. They're constantly getting looked at and reassessed, but then it takes a lot of time for that legislation to come through for any rates to normally rise. The social housing strategy is a real popular one at the moment, so that is used as a guideline, but like I say, depending on which provider you use, is very much dependent on what rate you will get. RSL, Registered Social Landlord. So this is a social housing provider. RSL is a term that's not used that commonly. We normally use social housing or social housing provider. Again, really common strategy in property at the moment. Gone are the days of the council building council houses and council estates where vulnerable people or people that can't afford their own house would be housed. Now it's normally private landlords that let their houses to RSLs, which are sometimes backed by the government. Don't always say that, that's not really the case, but the government has an influence in terms of the funding they give to these providers that then they pay to the private landlord. Do always be wary of people saying it's backed by the government. That's not always the case. Certainly if a provider folds and disappears, the government don't want anything to do with that. But the RSL is the Registered Social Landlord. A SAS and a SIP, these are two together. These are privately administered pension schemes that you can pay into and then invest into property. There are lots of strict rules and regulations about how you use your SASs and SIPs and what you can invest in and the percentage of the SASs and the SIPs that you can invest into property. It's a complex world, far too complex for my little brain. However, it is something that should be used because it is a great tax saving scheme to be able to invest in property. Great tool to use, but seek professional advice on that. If you are enjoying these acronyms, this help, these videos, please like and share across your platforms if you don't mind. It is super helpful for me. I'd like to do more of these, but I need a little bit of love. SPV, I get asked this loads. Special Purpose Vehicle. This is a limited company that is potentially part of your bigger company structured scheme. It's something where you might do a joint venture in. It's something that you might do a separate deal in that's linked to your holding company, as it might be. But an SPV is something that's used relatively regularly in property, different company wrapper that is separate to other parts of the business, sometimes used for safety, as in like if that goes wrong, it doesn't completely knacker up the whole structure. Sometimes used just to invest into and keep it clean and separate for accounting purposes. It can be used for lots of different parts, but an SPV is a special purpose vehicle and used regularly in property. PRS is the private rental sector. So obviously this factors in a lot of the private rental market, the private landlords. There are the bodies within the PRS. So the PRS is the private renter sector. And last on the sheet, and by not the least, SA, used loads at the moment, super common, is serviced accommodation. This is Airbnb, Booking.com type lets. These are let out on a nightly basis usually, or obviously you can get longer term, but let out nightly basis. And actually I've not put it on this sheet, but I will use it now because this is common and linked in with serviced accommodation, is rent to rent, R2R. That means where you rent a property from a landlord and then you use it for your own purpose, i.e. serviced accommodation or HMO. Loads of pitfalls in this, loads of things to be aware of. Can be useful, but also need to be careful. But serviced accommodation is used regularly in that terminology. But serviced accommodation is effectively, like I say, letting your house or house that you are renting or a house that you own on a nightly, single occupancy basis. You are normally responsible for the cleaning, for the linen, and for a few of the home comforts. So slightly different to your AST, where you can just let it out to somebody and let them go. So I hope you have found my little property acronym sheet and my waffle useful. If you are interested in investing in property, please click on the link below. If you are interested in learning more about property and want guidance and mentorship from myself, then please click on the link below. I look forward to hearing from you and thank you for watching.